Sixes, this is lesson 15. This is to roll out our final summative project for our cells unit. And so this project is really going to look at the cell organelles and cell types specifically. So in your OneNote binder, in the content library, in Unit 2 cells, page 15, this is all the project details. I'm going to go through it with you right now. So there will be a video lesson, so you can kind of ignore this part for now because you are partaking in the making of the video at the moment. So I'm just going to scroll down here to the rubric and the explanation. We're going to go through a couple of things together. So if you want the attachment, the document is here, but it's also printed out so you can see it all. So we're going to go through it kind of step by step. So this is called an analogy model, and we've talked a little bit about an analogy already, and we've been using a factory as our example analogy. And so that's what you are doing, is you're going to be comparing the cell and all the organelles to an analogy of your choice. So here's your summative task. Your summative task is to create an analogy. To support your analogy with creative visual models, and to explain the connections between your analogy and the cell structures and functions. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about what that means and what that looks like and some of the specifics. So you are creating a comparison, so that's what an analogy is. Your analogy is going to explain the functions of the organelles by making a connection to something. Okay, that's something I want to emphasize, that it should be about the function and not the appearance or the look. So we're not making a connection like, grass is similar to the chloroplast because it's green. It shouldn't be based on shape or color. It should be based on its function or purpose. So what does it do that makes them similar? So I've got an example here. We're actually going to go through this example in depth to talk about it. So this example only shows one organelle. You have a list of organelles that you're going to have to include. This is just one piece of that. Okay, so here's this example. Well, let's read through it together. In a factory, the solar panels are like the chloroplasts in the cell because they collect solar radiation and convert it into energy. Within the cell, chloroplasts also use solar radiation from the sun to make sugar, which can then be converted into ATP energy by the mitochondria. So we're actually going to read this a couple of times. I want to break down some of the words and talk about things. So in a factory, so this is the analogy world. We're going to compare all things to a part inside a factory. And then they have to pick a specific structure within the factory. And that's the other part of the analogy. And so I've actually color-coded some of the words here. And this helps you with your grading. So purple words, so things like analogy, things like describe, things like explain, this all comes down to our reporting standard of application of content area knowledge. Can you make those connections? Can you apply your thinking and understanding to make an analogy? Can you explain it? So in this case, the specific analogy structure is a solar panel. And then they've written here, are like. This is kind of that comparison statement. So solar panels are like chloroplasts. So this is the structure within the cell. And so all the words that are green, they give you kind of an indication that it's about structure and function, and you get a grade for structure and function. So, in a factory, the solar panels are like the chloroplasts. But we're not done yet. We haven't really explained anything, and that's the key there. We've just made a statement, but we need to explain why. So why are the solar panels like the chloroplast? How does that explanation relate to function? Okay, so if we read a little bit further, it says, In a factory, the solar panels are like the chloroplast of a cell because they collect solar radiation and convert it into energy. That's the function of solar panels. Within the cell, chloroplasts also use solar radiation from the sun to make sugar, which can then be converted into ATP energy by the mitochondria. So everything after this because statement is the explanation about the function. Okay, I'll erase all my little doodles here. All right. In terms of this assignment, there are a couple specifics, and I'm going to go through those expectations now. You only have to do one type of cell, so you don't have to do both. Pick one, your choice. Depends on what analogy you would like to create. Some analogies go better with a plant cell. Some analogies go better with an animal cell. That's your choice. So you're going to pick one, plant or animal. You cannot use a factory. So the factory was the one that we did together as a class as an example. I want to see your understanding, so I want you to create your own. Okay, so you cannot use a factory. As always, this can be created in any format or style of your choosing. You can use whatever app or tool you would like, as long as you're meeting all the assignment requirements. I am very flexible with the format. Here's the specifics of what you would have to ensure that you have. That you have clearly identified the cell type. That's because I need to know that you can correctly match which organelles belong in a plant cell and which organelles belong in an animal cell. So you'd have to identify the cell type you've chosen, and then I can look to see if you've got all the right organelles in place. All the relevant organelles are included. So that's what I mean by relevant. If you pick a plant cell, have you included all the organelles that belong in a plant cell? Okay. The real functions of all the organelles are explained clearly. You are getting a grade for structure and function, so I need to be able to understand or see your understanding of the cell structures and their functions. The functions of all the organelles are compared to a part of the analogy, and the connection is clearly explained. This is important. This is where I see the depth of your thinking. Why did you pick to put or compare those two things? What is it about them that is similar? And then it says connections are logical and easy to understand. So I want to talk about these two a little bit. I've had all sorts of different versions of this in the past, and I'm going to go through some examples later. I'll give you one right now. I've had people compare and create an analogy to the cell using Harry Potter or the world of wizarding. So for example, they might have said that Hogwarts is like the cell and the nucleus is like Dumbledore, but they're not explaining why. They're just making those connections. What if I had never seen a Harry Potter movie or I had never read a book? I would have no idea what you're talking about and if those connections made sense. So the explanation is important. You need to explain why you have connected those things. Assume I know nothing. Assume I have never read a book, seen a movie, don't know anything about anything. You have to make that clear in your explanations. Okay. The next one is to include visuals to support your analogy. So this is the model part, the visual model. The visuals that you create are about the analogy. You are not drawing the cell, you are drawing the world that you create. So for example, if I stick with the Harry Potter one, you would be drawing a map of Hogwarts and the characters in the story or the movie. The overall analogy stays within one general theme or world. So all of the structures that you make a comparison to, again, if I stick with the Harry Potter example, should all be part of the wizarding world. You wouldn't want to compare for example, the nucleus to Dumbledore, and then the cell to something from Avengers. Completely different universes and world. So stick within one general theme. So these are all the basic assignment expectations. And to the right, I have the minimum organelles that you have to have. Note that that's going to change depending on what type of cell you do include. So there are some organelles in here that don't belong in animal cells. There are some organelles that don't belong in a plant cell. So you have to make that connection. Okay. My other tips, depending on the type of analogy that you choose, whatever world you're comparing it to, it might be easier for you to separate the rough ER and smooth ER. You can totally do that. You can have one comparison or one structure for each, but if you would like, you can combine them into one as well, if that makes things a little bit easier. You can also add additional structures. These are the minimum ones that are required. These are the ones that we have talked about in 6th grade, focused on. All right, I'm going to just quickly go over the rubric. Same as always, our usual project rubrics. You're getting a grade for application of content area knowledge. So this comes down to those things that we mentioned above. This is the apply your knowledge. This is the explain, make connections. So your analogy itself kind of shows that, and how well you clarify and explain it. That's where we see your understanding about things like the facts and the content. And that's where we start to make the connection with structure and function. So for structure and function, I'm looking at, do you know the organelles? Do you know which ones go in plant cells, which ones go in animal cells? Can you describe the functions of all of those organelles correctly? And so that comes back, they connect, right? Can you describe and explain the functions of all the organelles? There's some crossover. And then the next grade you're getting is for systems and system models. So this has to do a little bit with your visuals. So this is the visual model that you're creating. Is it clear? Does it give a connection to the organelle and the analogy world? So those are things like labels, clarity, design. Think about those concepts. And as well as the quality and clarity of your explanation. Can you use a model effectively to explain a system? In this case, the world analogy and the cell. So I'll go through some of the indicators. For application of content area knowledge, can you make clear connections between the analogy and the cell? Do you understand the facts? Do you know the organelles and their functions? Can you use that vocabulary correctly to help you explain and clarify understanding? So there's the explain one. You aren't really predicting anything with this type of a model. Can you use that factual information to construct understanding and an explanation? For structure and function, are you able to identify all the organelles and their function? Can you describe the functions of all those parts within the cell and your analogy? How are they connected? What's the relationship between the analogy and the organelle's function? So for your model, have you identified all the components of your system? So have you identified it in terms of the cell and your analogy? A great way to do that is labels. So develop a model. So the whole analogy world that you create, this is your model. It's showing a relationship among parts. Have you been able to include all of those structures and their functions? In terms of the visuals, Do the visuals represent the real variable? Is it obvious what you're trying to show us and tell us in terms of information? This one connects with the application of content knowledge. This comes down to the quality of your explanation, your descriptions, and your connections about the functions and the organelles. So that's kind of an overview of this project, the general expectations. It's time to take a little brain break. Alright, we've done our brain break. We now understand what's expected of us for the cell project. I'm going to go through a couple of examples from previous years just so you can get an idea. Just because these are examples that I'm showing you does not mean they are perfect. Unfortunately, these are the only ones that I had access to where I am right now in the world. So keep in mind, the format is up to you. I've had digital models, I've had physical things built, I've had Minecraft, video. The format is your choice. I just only happen to have written ones. Okay. So the first example is comparing the animal cell to baseball. And so I'll just read a couple just to give you a sense. So let's do the Golgi body. So the Golgi body is like the ball boys. They sort and deliver fouls to the baskets. The Golgi bodies sorts, packages, and delivers all the stuff the cell makes. So does the ball boys. Instead, they use foul balls. So they're making a comparison between a Golgi body and the ball boys. And so they do this for all the organelles. So this is a baseball example. This one is comparing an animal cell to a farm. So they've got like the farmer, the cows, the trash can, the post office, the milk. So let's look at a nucleus. A nucleus is like the owner of the farm because the nucleus functions like the boss. It's overall, it controls everything. Like it can be the home for the DNA, making ribosomes, hiring farmers, controlling cells, functions, etc. So the owner of the farm really controls everything like the nucleus. An example, if a farmer is not doing great, they can go and tell them to work harder, and they can offer more profits. This one, I won't read all of these, but just to show you a couple of other ideas, this one compares all the organelles to the Titanic. There was a giant picture of the Titanic, a map looking at the inside of the boat that they had drawn. I just don't have it with me. So this also had a visual to go with it. This one is comparing the Hunger Games in District 12 to a plant cell. Again, there's a piece of this missing. I don't have it anymore. It was an entire world created in Minecraft with a video explanation. This was just the map to help you find your way around the Minecraft world. So these are just a couple of examples. The choices are endless. I've had things like schools, cities, prisons, various movies of all sorts, books, Athens, Greece, Sparta, all sorts of kind of connections. So your choice, completely what you make the analogy for. You just cannot use a factory. So we will start working on this next class. So, I went too far. So today there is actually no exit ticket. Instead, I've sent out the summative assessment details to your OneNote binder. We won't actually start working officially until next class. Today there is no exit ticket. I just wanted to make sure everybody understood the instructions clearly.